Hi, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for coming today. I'm Neera Tandon, the Chief Operating Officer for the Center for American Progress, and I'm honored to welcome you here to today's very important panel. Our panel discussion today is on mental health care services and primary care, and it's very fitting that we do it this week, which is National Mental Illness Awareness Week, which was first established in 1990 to raise awareness of mental illness. The Affordable Care Act will make a huge difference in the lives of those with mental illness. It's one of the difficulties of the Act is that it's so encompassing that there are numerous issues and changes and ways that it'll affect healthcare in a positive direction that haven't gotten a lot of attention. And so we're really happy to do this panel here at CAP today to actually focus on mental illness and how the law in numerous ways will benefit those with mental illness because it hasn't received the attention it should. There are specific issues and specific provisions of the bill that address mental illness, specifically in terms of ensuring that we have a benefits package for those in the exchanges that actually provides mental health services. This was an area of some controversy and throughout the legislative process, but it was a victory for those advocates for people on behalf of mental illness, and it's an important benefit. But that's not really the only important element for those who have mental illness and who are suffering with mental illness. There are numerous provisions in the legislation that don't specifically focus on mental illness, but are ones that are critical to ensure that we're implementing well, whether school-based clinics actually provide mental health services, whether primary care services and primary care doctors have the training they need to provide mental health services. These are critical elements of the legislation, and we'll really be focusing on the latter one as part of our today's discussion. And to help start off our discussion, we are very honored to have Congressman Patrick Kennedy here, who, for those people who've been working on these issues for a very long time, we all know of the Congressman's tremendous leadership on this issue in the House of Representatives. There really is no better friend to those advocates, for advocates on behalf of mental illness than Congressman Kennedy, who has been working on these issues year in, year out. I was legislative director for Senator Clinton, and she was honored to work with Patrick Kennedy on numerous issues around these issues and healthcare overall. Congressman Kennedy has been in the House since 1995, and he has been a clear advocate for these issues. He was a big champion and promoter of Senator Wellstone's legislation on mental health parity, and he helped ensure that that legislation passed, and it is the law of the land. He also worked through the Affordable Care Act on ensuring that mental health benefits were part of the basic benefit package, which has been a critical victory for those advocating on behalf of mental illness. And I would argue that provision, as much as anything else, will really transform the way mental health services are treated in this country when millions of Americans can have that essential basic benefit package. It will become a norm for all insurers in the country. And I think that is a huge victory for advocates and a huge victory for the congressman. And so with that, I'm honored to introduce Congressman Kennedy, who will take a few questions, which I'll moderate at the end of his introduction.
Thanks, Neera. Thank you. Thank you, Neera, and thank you to Center for American Progress. Let me thank all of you for coming today, because clearly you're here because you care about this issue. And first and foremost, as someone who's benefited from the advocacy that's gone on in the community over the years, as a consumer of mental health services, I just want to thank you on behalf of all those whose lives have been improved tremendously and by the work that all of you have done over the years. And I'm indeed humbled by the support that has come in terms of getting these issues done. And frankly, it was so exciting that we did get the Parity Act done in 2008 because it made that one less battle that we had to fight when it came to the Affordable Health Care Act. But frankly, I think this timing of this conference is so important because this is where the rubber meets the road, is the implementation and the enforcement of these issues and the actual bringing it into practice. And I am surprised because I've seen how much lobbying's gone on with this Affordable Health Care Act and mental health over the years, that the silence is deafening. We have the greatest opportunity right now to make enormous headway in destigmatization and implementation of mental health if we work with Richard Frank from HHS, work with General Counsel Mark Childress. I mean, the president brought him back, even though he didn't come with Tom Daschle, to say, I want you to write the regs. We have Don Berwick over at CMS. This is the time to get demonstration projects up and going that incorporate the subject matter at hand, integration of mental health into primary care. And when I call Mark Childress and ask him, have you thought about making sure that non-medical is part of the essential benefits package, even though it's not medical? The guy that makes the biggest difference in my life now, I pay for after taxes to stay on me to make sure I keep on the wagon, as opposed to leaving it up to the vagaries of a 12-step program, which we all are in great gratitude for the founders of that, Bill and Dr. Bob. But frankly, if you don't have someone, and if you have someone who's reticent to even following through, because that's part of the disease, you need someone who's on you. That doesn't get reimbursed. And yet it's the biggest difference that could make in my life in keeping on track, because we know it's a chronic illness. We know, from my experience, that I've been back to rehab several times. Why doesn't insurers say, hey, rather than pay top flight for treatment, we get someone to help keep them out of treatment? Now, the guy that makes the biggest difference in my Uncle Sarge Shriver's life, who has Alzheimer's, is the guy that picks him up and helps him get through the house so that he can sit down with all of us for a meal. That's not medical, but I can guarantee you that's the single best thing that we can do to help my Uncle Sarge with his Alzheimer's. A friend of mine whose father has Parkinson's has been getting in car accidents, little fender benders. Why? Because of the illness, a neurological illness, he can't get the foot on the brake in enough time with Parkinson's. He is absolutely functional in every other way. Why aren't we reimbursing for transportation as health care? Those services shouldn't be after taxes paid for. Those ought to be tax deductible. That's how you move mental health into the 21st century in an important way that addresses the fact that you want supportive living. You want supportive employment. You want supported housing. We know these things are the demonstrated success stories of keeping the highest cost per capita patient, those with neurological disorders. I mean, Karen Ignani ought to be all over this. But as she talked to Mark Childress about insurers having the ability to incorporate non-medical and get that as part of the essential benefits package, no. I mean, how could an insurance system that is so into trying to figure out a way to deal with the new law that requires everybody get included through the pre-existing condition elimination of discrimination, why in the world wouldn't they think about other ways to keep people from ending up in the emergency room? Now we have the Village program right here up on Capitol Hill. There's a program called Rise and Shine. It's totally a cooperative, no reimbursement for government, and yet you ask the Washington Rehab Hospital what's the single best way to keep people out of that place, they'll tell you it's this co-op. It's neighbors contracting with neighbors to call each other up in the morning if they have an issue, neurological disorder, mental illness, depression, whatever. Call it, because the people there say, I want you to call, neighbor, because I have a tough time reaching out. That's part of the other aspect of the illness. And it's part of all of our nature. We don't want to ask for help. Why not ask for it in front and say, hey, listen, call me every day. If I don't get back to you within an hour, 2 hours, come visit me or send someone to come visit me. I mean, this is not new stuff. And it's not complicated stuff. The biggest difference on Meals on Wheels, which my father had an enormous part in creating, is not the meal. It's the human interaction. It's what we're missing in society today. Now, another issue. The reason we ought to do all this is because, as Neera pointed out, we have this health care bill. It is a veterans bill. 72% of all veterans will never see the VA. That's a shocker to people. They don't realize that it's this health care bill that's going to require that they not get discriminated against because of TBI, PTSD, and the like. A lot of these are Guard and reservists. Now, sure, they'll say, oh, well, that was qualified for under disability. I can tell you, I know a lot of vets who aren't going to the VA to get this stuff identified, who are going to need it in years to come and need this insurance to cover it. And guess what? We don't have supportive living, supportive employment. Why are we coordinating with Jane Oates, Assistant Secretary of Labor, who's about to let $2 billion out for job training and emergency certification for people who are unemployed? And by the definition of dislocated worker, that includes veterans, all veterans. Why aren't we putting an outreach together that ties what she's doing to say we want emergency, because these vets are coming home. They don't have time to go to a 4-year college. They don't have time to just take 3 credits a day. They want to go like regular workers from the beginning of the day to the end of the day because they need that degree. They need to start providing for their families. That's what that $2 billion is for. Why aren't we as the mental health community involved in that? Why aren't we involved with the Vet Corps? It's the National Service Act. Proud to say that's named after my father. That will be the wraparound service, veteran supporting veteran through mentoring. We have this great GI Bill, the biggest advancement in GI Bill since World War II, and just terrific. All I know is I had a tough time getting through college just because of social-emotional issues I had. Not academic, but social-emotional. Thank God I had support. I could pay for it. What in the world do you think these vets are going to deal with? They got more baggage than the average college student going on campus. What are we doing? You know there's going to be hearings in the Oversight Committee, I guarantee you, next year or two. Forget this private college, not public issue that's going on now. That just doesn't, that pales in terms of the scandal that's going to be when these colleges, universities take this GI Bill, but don't guarantee that these veterans graduate, and we have high retention rates and graduation rates. That's not part of the GI Bill. That's not part of veterans. We're spending more and more on veterans services in the VA, but we've missed the ball on supportive services there. And by the way, vets want fellow vets. This allows less stigmatization, makes them feel better. Someone's having trouble paying that bill, getting out of bed, trying to get out there because they're getting flashbacks, they've got confusion because they've got, even though they're not registered to have TBI, they got mild TBI. We'll never know it for years. They need support services. Why aren't we working to provide those wraparound services? That ought to be reimbursed, as I said, through the medical system. Let's just focus as a demonstration project on just neurological disorders, because whether you've got an affective disorder, depression or addiction, or you've got, severe neurological disorder, you need the same services. This is the biggest opportunity we have to totally take this forward. Now, the other important, enormously important aspect right now is that we can't let the New York Times front page write about the fact that we have more veterans, actually not veterans, because we already know they represent nearly a fourth of all suicides, 336,000 a year, which is scandalous. But the fact that our soldiers in uniform are taking their own lives at greater numbers than are killed in action. Where are we? We should have forget the Tea Party protesting and creating a gauntlet for us before we go and vote. We should have had the mental health community partnering with the veterans community. Say, how dare these members of Congress go home without dressing the single biggest signature wound on this war, TBI and PTSD, and making sure these vets don't get left behind. They're held hostage today, these veterans. People go, what, held hostage? I didn't hear about Al-Qaeda or, anybody taking them hostage. If they were taken hostage by Al-Qaeda, we put the full might of military power to go in there and take them back. But right now, they're held hostage by their traumatic brain injury, held hostage by their PTSD, because they don't want to go out and get the help because it's stigmatized. And what does the New York Times do? They say there's a 1-800 mental health hotline for helping keep people from taking their own lives. Give me a break. They talk about it as it's mental health, it's mental illness. They talk about it as psychological. They talk about it as behavioral. That was the suicide report. The Congress Commission, all the best and brightest. I saw the whole rollout, read the thing. No major emphasis on the fact this is a physiological wound. You want to take stigma away? Call this for what it is, a neurological disorder. We've got the brain scans. We got the preliminary genetics. What are we thinking? This American public is not going to buy onto a mental health agenda until they understand the biology, the neurology, the physiology of these illnesses. And what are we doing? We're missing the single greatest opportunity to take our movement and move it forward as if parity didn't even exist. This is going to be even bigger. Because the veteran is non-stigmatized. The veteran everybody feels for. The veteran is our hero. They're going to be the ones that not only kick down the doors overseas against terrorists, they're going to kick down the doors here at home if we get behind them. Because 72% of them get their health care through this Health Care Act. And if we set up a system to help our veterans by bringing in these insurers and say, what's your plan for our nation's veterans? Believe me, they'll have to scramble, they'll have to say, geez, we just got a shout out, a call to Washington to present on behalf of what we're doing in our health care plans for veterans. Guess what? They'll scramble, they'll come up with a program. Just by dint of us calling them and getting these Klieg lights on them, seeing what they say up here. That's how you move. And this notion that we are not defining what they're going through right now as a physiological, and that we say, oh, well, these are mental illnesses and the like. We got to change our nomenclature. Got to change it up. We want these vets to reach out for help. They got to know it's physiological. We know it is. Cortisol pumping through the brain nonstop. They're out there in harm's way. Why do you think the addiction rate in terms of gambling is so high? Because they just are used to high-risk, high-threat environments. The fight or flight response is going all the time. It's changing the hardwiring in their brain. We know this. The Kaiser ACE study amongst children demonstrated it again, conclusively, almost 1-to-1. What are we doing? We're wondering why. Because they're the best, the brightest, the strongest. So when they're hit with something that says, oh, geez, this is a character flaw, I can't get it together, I'm depressed, or we had a hearing last week on neuroscience within the federal government. We even had, after all of this, after the report 2 weeks ago that said the DOD's, program for suicide was an utter failure by the chief Ballas from, Walter Reed, said we are stigmatizing this by pathologizing it as a mental illness. And what do we wonder these vets don't want to go get help? The fact of the matter is, this is our opportunity to break it wide open. I wish I could say in this town that, the fact that Alzheimer's is skyrocketing, autism is skyrocketing, Parkinson's is skyrocketing, disability, and that it's the single leading cause of morbidity, cost of days, lost productivity, mortality, you name it, are these illnesses. It won't move the needle. But there's one group that nobody can turn their back on. It's the nation's veterans. Why aren't we getting them? Why isn't this room got a bunch of veterans organizations? We're missing it. And frankly, I think that they're held hostage by stigma. They're held behind the enemy lines of of status quo that says we can't get in there and do it. We don't even have an emergency science system. You know what the NINDS, they just released a 7-year TBI study. Sorry, but if I'm a parent of one of these vets going over there, I'll be outraged. I'll be postal that the federal government is saying that's a 7-year study. When you got TBIs, 150,000 every year, every major trauma one center, every night of the week, and we can't field something that is helping us get that information back in real time, this is a war. And then you had the audacity of that, the fellow Dr. Rouse, who's representing DOD, say, well, we've got objective standards to identify TBI, and we're working on a dual track with mental illness to define PTSD. Give me a break. They're both physiological. You had Tom Insel, 3 people before, put up a chart and say it's all neurological. And he was re-stigmatized. And this is the guy that ought to get it. Point is, we have the opportunity to really make the biggest difference now if we get behind the veterans. And as they say, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of care. An ounce of research is going to be worth a pound of care. Because right now we have the single greatest opportunity to move the ball forward in understanding of the brain. And as we learned with AIDS, and as we learned with cancer, both of which were stigmatized, the quicker we got to defining it in medical and scientific terms, the quicker we got over the stigma. And this is a race. And we should look at it as an emergency science. Everybody out there knows we can't go by this 6-7 year study just to do the field, the research. Then you got to approve it by NIH. I mean, if I'm one of these vets, my uncle said on the Civil Rights Address in 1963, who amongst us would be willing to trade the color of their skin and abide by the counsels of patience and delay? This is a civil rights fight. Because in essence, who amongst us would be willing to trade places with those returning vets, suffer their illnesses, and say, oh, well, we'll get around to doing restorative stem cell research in 15 years. We'll finally get it. We'll get those genetic markers done within a certain period of time. I find that, the other quote JFK used about the fellow that said, how long will it take for that tree to bloom? Oh, it's going to take 50 years. Then plant it this afternoon. Where is the urgency? I'm one of those vets. I'm saying, are they in it to win it or not? They talk a good game. We read the Washington Post the other about TBI. When are we going to get it? So I think the outrage needs to be ratcheted up. My staff always goes after me. I'm ratcheting too much. But frankly, on this subject, I think, the sooner we define it as a veterans fight as our fight, get behind them, the sooner we all win. Because they not only stood up to the terrorism and the tyranny overseas, they're standing up to the tyranny of we can't do better here. The tyranny of stigma. That's what these vets are going to break wide open. And for us to not get behind them, I think is a missed opportunity of, huge proportions. I want to thank everybody who's going to be panelists today. I always say they're the ones who just understand better than anyone else how frustrating it is to not get this needle moved further along. And I want to thank all of them for their good work. Thanks, Nara.
I think we can all say that we all desperately hope that Congressman Kennedy's passion and advocacy on behalf of mental illness and other issues continues past his in the years to come. With that, I think he has quite time for 1 or 2 questions. So can I call on people in the audience?
Thank you. George Gould with Gould Incorporated. I've been working with a veterans group, and as you know, Patrick, I've been working on the mental health issue. And it's very hard to get them, frankly, to talk to each other. I'm going to be very candid. They don't have a constitutional attitude. Mm-hmm. They just keep on doing what they've been doing and don't actually interrelate. Is there a third group we could go to? Do we go to members of Congress? Do we go to people in federal agencies? It seems that there has to be someone to intervene to get these two groups to start to actually talk to each other.
Excellent. Thanks, George. Quick, last week, talked all about TBI. We don't have common elements set, meaning data set for TBI in this country, meaning DOD can't communicate with the civilian sector on what TBI constitutes, so we can benefit from the shared knowledge. It's like not Einstein, we don't know what we don't know. We don't know what we know because we got to go to conferences for everybody to share. No, a doctor in Providence doing research ought to know what a researcher in San Diego is doing so you don't have to duplicate. We don't have the resources for redundancy. So, perfect point. We don't have the political infrastructure. We did it with the campaign for mental health reform when it came to parity. Frankly, we got to do we got to do the American Cancer Society of brain research and brain science. They spent years all going their own ways till they figured out, baby, we're stronger united than we are divided. This is the fight. Got to get all together because we all have commonality. All researchers will all tell you they're agnostic, whether it's schizophrenia or it's bipolar or it's epilepsy or whatever. You know what? The work that they're going to do on the basic research is going to accrue to everybody's advantage. And yet you got philanthropists all over there dumping a bunch of money. Get to the cure for autism. Go, go, go. Well, guess what? If we all work together, we'll get there quicker, faster, more effectively. Finally, the Justice Department. Do you know what the rate of veterans ending up in the criminal justice system is? That's one hell of a way to welcome them home. They're suffering from the symptoms of PTSD and TBI, and what do? We lock them up. If you told this to the American public, they shake their heads and say, what are they doing? I know the American public say, what are they doing in Washington? But this is the thing that, what I think would just take it to another level. So, why we're not getting Shinseki and Sebelius together to talk about, non-medical. These are in the VA regs, DOD regs. Let's get them in these regs. Why aren't we talking with getting Holder and Shinseki together? We can't pass a vet court. Take into account what the veteran's history is and make that assessment. If Anthony Kennedy can say we should treat juveniles differently because their prefrontal cortex isn't fully developed, what about a vet just been slammed, been in the field, repeated tours of duty, and what? We're not going to take into account what impact that might have had on them ending up in the criminal justice system? I got a conference in Rhode Island. We've got the police officers with the prosecutors all getting together saying, we want diversionary programs for vets. We set that up for vets. It's agnostic. It'll be everybody. That's our fight. And in the science, in terms of predictive modeling, we're going to have advances in PET scans and fMRIs that will help be determinative, along with the genetics, help us to identify who's highest risk. That's a healthcare issue that's got strong correlation with the criminal justice system. Why aren't we coordinating? Well, the President Kennedy's anniversary of his moonshot address is May 25th. We're doing got that reserved for the similar moonshot of our time. The new frontier for our time is brain research. We got to do it within the decade for these vets. We got to harness that can-do attitude that he had back then. If we could go to the moon, return a man safely within a decade, tell me, as Americans, we can't get to the bottom of this. And yet Chinese are beating our pants off on neuroscience. Europeans are putting up labs all the time. What are we doing? We could be the ones. Solve our veterans' problems, solve everybody, and lead the world. This is the can-do attitude that we need to return to. And most of all, the mental health community, who just constantly gets beaten down. You all know that. Beaten down, disillusioned. What's going to happen? This is our time. We don't move now. President said combat operations are over. The war's just beginning for these veterans. We got to go in there and save them for everybody's sake, because they're our heroes, and they deserve nothing less. And I dare any one of my colleagues to vote against a program that you put together to deal with an aggressive intervention to keep our veterans from ending up in the criminal justice, or aggressive intervention to make sure they're supported in their lives, that ties all this together. You put that platform together, that proposal. Richard Frank's waiting. Mark Childress is waiting. I know Holder. I know Shinseki. They'll all be welcoming it.
Thank you. Can I have a round of applause for the Congressman?